Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsey Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Oh, yeah, you are, because I'm one of the founding members, a.k.a. Reconstituted, and then also spread the news, spread the word, subscribe.
Subscribe, by the way. Head on over to Facebook and tell those folks to get their butts over to YouTube to subscribe, but also to hit that like button. We had a really good like button day yesterday. I think we can keep on increasing the peace, as it was, spreading the word. Our good friend Lindsey Lawler, by the way, reached out to us to say good morning. I actually told her about Brad Paisley yesterday doing the national anthem at Chavez Ravine. And by the way, I will say this, though. Lindsey said it's still not a Super Bowl halftime, and I agree. But that being said, it was the opening Los Angeles game of the World Series. I mean, the heart of La La Land. And they picked Brad Paisley to come out there and do his thing. By the way, good morning to everybody out there. Really quickly, before we get to Maintenance Matters, we will make a transition into that. On October 23rd in Donna, Texas, bus driver Arsenio Homer Sesteta was on his usual bus route. According to KRGV News, Sesteta was driving through Val Verde Road and Frontage Road. Before 6 a.m., he noticed a semi-truck slowing down in the intersection. He thought the rig had broken down, but he had a bad feeling in his gut. I got the hunch to get off the bus. I walked up to the truck, started knocking on the door. I didn't get a response, and then started knocking on the window. Nothing. Well, the driver's daughter was following behind him, and she got out with Sesteta, and they began knocking on the door. Well, it turned out they actually had to wake him up. He actually had some kind of spell or seizure or maybe even a stroke. We got him off the vehicle slowly because he wasn't reacting. We evaluated the situation as quickly as possible because if it was a stroke, every second would count, and that can make a difference between life and death. The truck driver was taken to the hospital. He is expected to recover. Details of the driver's condition have not been released, but the truck driver's family has since thanked Sesteta. Big shout out to that bus driver helping one of your brethren make it to the next checkpoint. Don't ever forget the men and women who drive buses, school buses, tour buses, and all that. They deal with a lot of the same stuff you do.
Oh, no, you're good. Go right ahead.
I'm just going to say keep that in mind as you see all those buses on the road. They're doing the same hard work you're doing and require often the same maintenance. So with that in mind, what do you say we get a little music here and we drift into Maintenance Matters? Featuring the talents of Kevin Lindsey, Manager of Technical Service for TravelCenters of America. Maintenance Matters is every Tuesday here on Radio Nemo. Good morning to you, my friend. How you been?
I've been all right. How you doing, Jimmy?
Well, we were actually talking with our good friend Trucker Bosun, who called earlier into the show to tell us it was 42 degrees in Ohio, but with sunny skies, and the only clouds he could see looked like, like chemtrails. But it's a great reminder because even here this morning, the temperature, we had a little bit of rain yesterday here, and the temperature, New Orleans style, went from about 78 degrees to about 62 in the blink of an eye, and is supposed to keep dropping incrementally over the course of the week so that when it gets even a little chilly in New Orleans, we know that all that work we've been talking about the last few weeks is really important to keep doing to get ourselves ready for winter. What is the weather like in your neck of the woods?
Oh, it's I don't know, around 50 degrees this morning. Not too bad. It's warmer than it was, I think yesterday we were in the 30s, if I remember right, yesterday morning. So it was a little cool.
And by the way, I've always said that the whole point of October and early November is it's cool enough to remind you to do all the stuff you have to do to kind of get ready for the winter. Do you remember where we were when we last left off?
Was I supposed to keep track of that, Jimmy?
No, I'm on top of it, by the way. I just wanted to.
I thought Dre was on top of that.
Dre actually left the room when we brought that up. He just began to kind of slink out and make his way for the other side where I wouldn't hear him kind of slink out in shame. We actually we were finishing up on belts, is what we were talking about. Talking about alternator belts and all that before kind of sliding into fuel. We were just about to look at contaminants in the tank. And by the way, when it comes to winter, I can't wait to kind of dig into the fuel tank because it's one of those things that a lot of people don't think about, and they end up getting bit in the ass by it. So what do you say we kind of wrap up alternator belts, and then we'll kind of pivot to fuel?
Yeah. Well, as we were talking last week about belts and everything, the changing of the weather, the seasons, and everything with the contraction and expansion, it really wears on those types of things. And it's one of those things a lot of people don't think about. So, most manufacturers do have a predetermined amount of usually mileage, that you should replace your belts and things like that. But, some of the best practices I've seen at fleets out there is every so many PMs or regular PMs, they go ahead and replace their belts to keep from having those breakdowns out on the road, because those are not only costly but extremely time consuming, and can be extremely costly, because when something breaks, especially like with a belt, there's a good chance there's some other damage that could occur, especially underneath that hood at the speed some of that stuff, some of these pulleys are turning, at engine RPMs at road speed. So there's some damage can get done. So you wouldn't think of a belt causing a lot of big tickets, as far as repairs and things like that, but they really could. So.
Two things. The first of which is, and we began to kind of touch on this last time, the thing about a belt is that the belt is easy to replace. It's what happens when you go for any period of time without a belt, what kind of happens in the aftermath of that. The belt itself isn't the problem. Belt's a cheap thing. They're easy to purchase, no problem, put a new one on, which is why, as far as the maintenance things goes, belts are terrific. As far as a broken belt goes, it's a disaster. I did have a weird question for you, because I'm a big baseball fan, and I watched this kid, and it's the only way to describe him, this kid from Japan, Yamamoto, throw a complete game in the World Series. And it was happening last night with the Toronto pitcher, Max Scherzer. They actually got better, both of them, in the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth innings. They actually were throwing stronger. And what I wanted to ask you in regards to maintenance, is there a point where you can change things too much, that it's important to let things run a little bit because they might actually, I guess what I'm asking is, does a belt never run better than when it first gets put on? Or like people warming up, does it need a chance to kind of get into the kind of flow and groove of the engine that it's serving? Does that make sense? Can you do too much maintenance?
It does make sense. You could, yeah. But like with belts, they do take. There is like a run-in period, I guess you could call it, where when they're initially replaced, it's going to take a few thousand miles. A few, possibly even several tens of hours of engine running time for that belt to actually truly seed into where it's going to live the rest of its life, mainly, so to speak, because they will stretch some. They have some give. They're going to stretch. They're going to wear in and fit, and so there is kind of a break-in period. So, and then once it's there, that's when that really long life we see on nowadays. It seems like we live in such a throwaway society, it feels like, with so many different components and pieces and parts and everything, but things are made a lot better, it seems, than they used to be as far as tolerances and things like that go. In the old days, the old V belts, they had a lot bigger tolerance and forgiveness for running loose and everything, because you could just tighten them up and move things out of the way. But nowadays it's not. But these things are made so much better, so tighter, that once they get into that groove, they could run for a long time without causing any problems. So.
I will tell you this. This segment has ruined me to some extent, because I swear to God, I was telling Dre this morning, I am such a baseball fan, and I'm watching this kid pitch, and I'm listening to John Smoltz, the Hall of Famer, former Atlanta Brave, complaining. He's right about pitch counts and the idea that, these kind of data points of like, once you get here, that's it. You've got to take the pitcher out. And this kid threw 123 pitches, complete game, and looked better on the penultimate pitch than he did when he started the game and he was a little bit shaky. And I'm watching him play, and I'm looking at his glove, and I began thinking about baseball gloves, the idea that remember when you bought a brand new glove? It was a brand new glove is not the best time to have a glove. There's a peak point for things, and I kept thinking about this segment, and I'm like going, I hate Kevin Lindsey. He's done this to me. I can't even enjoy baseball without making comparisons to the maintenance of a rig.
Well, and you got to remember, when we were kids, you get a new glove. The first thing you did, you had to put like some oil on it, and you rolled it up, and you put it under your mattress and slept on it at night to try to get it to soften up.
You know what's crazy is my grandfather, I'm left-handed, my grandfather bought me a glove, and what he did was he bought it for me for Christmas. And he bought it at the top of the month and wrapped it and actually put it in his closet and would take it out every day just to soften it up. He wouldn't put it on his hand because he loved baseball. He just loved it. And he would do that. So by the time I got the glove, it was soft so that I could then just shape my hand into it, because he didn't want me to have to spend that. Talk about somebody loving you very much. I didn't even think about that till many years later. Good God Almighty! Yeah. And it smelled new, so it wasn't like he didn't like take it outside and rub it in the dirt or anything. But I wanted to know that. I know that was like a little bit of a kind of a walk into the weeds, but there is a point where you don't want to get too anal retentive about your stuff. If it's working and it's a little bit older, but it's in good shape, just check on it, make sure it's going okay, right?
Oh, absolutely, right. It is, and once you do that, you should be good, right? I do suggest, to have some type of long-term plan for taking care of things like that on the truck and just replacing them. But you've got to really base that on, the equipment you have, and how long did the old one last, and all those types of different things. Historical data can really help drive what you do for the future, right?
All right, we're going to pivot here now to fuel, because this is one of the things that my brother paid for dearly when he actually had to run trucks out of his weatherization shop. Let's just begin when it comes to the fuel tank. Better make sure you got a flashlight. Mm-hmm. You better make sure that you know how to look for contaminants. So let's talk about how to actually use I know that sounds crazy, how to use a flashlight when it comes to looking for contaminants. But you can get micro here if you want to. Talk about how to inspect that tank. Yeah,
well, you do want that flashlight. You want to be able to see down in that tank. And, I don't know. I don't know how to start this or how to say this, but I really, some of our newer technology on things, these fuel tanks back several years ago, manufacturers started coming up with these anti-siphon inserts that go in these tanks, and it's to keep people from stealing fuel.
Right.
I get that, but I think that's one thing that has kind of happened, since that, because it's not as easy to see down in that tank with those pieces in there, with those anti-siphon components in the neck of that tank. But you really want a good flashlight, a small flashlight, so you can focus that beam down into that tank to see, and you're looking for anything that looks unusual. The fuel, you should be able to see all the way to the bottom. If it's cloudy or murky, then something's not right, right? You could see water at the bottom of the tank. That's actually fairly common because it is a natural occurrence. You got these, 100-gallon tanks on each side of a truck that have, 2 days ago it was 85 degrees and they got sun on them and there's space in them. And so that means there's air in those tanks as long as those fuel tank vents are open, which they should be. So and then it cools down at night, and you're going to get some of that condensation. So you're going to get water, that you can see in the bottom of that tank, and that's where it should go because the fuel is actually lighter than the water. So it always sounds funny, but that's the way it works, right? We know that oil floats on top of water, same with fuel. So when you look down in that bottom, and because there probably will be small amounts of water, pockets in there, that's where you want to look because most things we deal with, contaminants we deal with, whether it's very small soluble pieces of, dirt and debris, different things like that, but it's going to migrate towards the water because water has a tendency is probably the most soluble substance we deal with, in our lives. You can almost dissolve anything in water except for fuel, of course. So you can look at that because it actually can help attract some of that dirt and debris out, and then once that water gets out of that tank, if it gets sucked up out of that tank, that's why it's good to have some sort of water separator on that truck. That way you can drain that as well. So because when you do drain the water out, you're not only draining the water, you're draining contaminants as well because there's a good possibility that's where they're going to migrate to, unless, of course, they're petroleum-based contaminants. Then they'll migrate to the fuel more than the water. So.
This is interesting, by the way. My dad once told me, and by the way, this is what happens when you grow up with a father who works in the maritime and oil and gas industry in the state of Louisiana. He told me that anything that is underneath the water in a tank is really not good.
Right, because that means it's heavier than the water.
That's exactly it.
So it can't be good, right?
He said it means it's not good. He said if you drain a tank, anything that you didn't see until you drained everything else out is a real problem. And he said it's probably what the problem is. He said anything that actually makes its way past the water is the issue inside of the tank. And if you're and by the way, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm actually asking genuine questions. Anything that is a contaminant that's floating in the fuel at the top is actually easy to get to. It's anything that actually, settles in that tank, genuinely settles. It means it's actually trying to live there, and it's going to cause problems. And if you don't do something about it, it means you have less and less room for not only fuel, but also water. And that's a problem, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the other thing, this water I'm talking about, that you get from condensation and everything. If it lives in that same spot in the bottom of that tank for too long, you're going to start getting algae growth and different things like this. Once you come up with any sort of biological growth in that water, it's only going to cause more and more problems. Because believe it or not, there are some species of algae and things like that actually can thrive in those types of environments, surrounded by that fuel and even cling to that fuel, to migrate around. So it's kind of a crazy thing when you stop and think about it. But, and what it'll do is it'll cause that fuel to look kind of cloudy, and could change the color of the fuel to an extent. Not enough to get in trouble with the revenue man and stuff like that, but
Well, the other thing is, don't ever forget this, man. There are some forms of biodiesel that actually are being taken from algae. Don't forget that, folks.
Yes.
Don't.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
There's a connection. There's a connection between that. That's the kind of reminder that it's like at the end of the day, guys, don't forget fuel Most fuel is
Right.
the result of something that used to be living that we are now using to power the world around us.
Yeah, right, right. It's it's kind of an odd thing. It's big. I guess you could say it's probably part of that circle of life. As we move along, this vastness of space that we're in, right?
Yeah, what is it? What's the great thing that we all, at the end of the day, we're all stardust, and that stardust settles into the earth, and then it also becomes the stuff that actually powers our ability to go to the stars. I did want to ask you really quickly. You brought this up. Anything that is anti-theft is also anti-shade mechanic. I just realized that from talking to you, that so much of the defeat of shade mechanics has been not because people have lost the skill. It's because so many things are being built now in such a way that you actually have to be trained to the point of not figuring stuff out yourself, because it's all designed
Yeah.
not to be stolen from. And that's a good thing, but it also makes it a lot hard to tinker with stuff and put it back together in an
Oh, it
effective
does.
way.
Yeah, it does, right? I don't know. One of the biggest things for many of that I would really point out on these, we start talking about the fuel tanks, looking at them, and all these different things on the trucks, nowadays for different things. But when all is said and done, it's still nothing more than a tank that's designed to sit there and hold fuel. And for years we had vents in these tanks. We still do, because so many of these fuel systems nowadays rely on, basically nothing more than gravity. Most OEMs will actually tell you in their literature on most modern engines that when you go to replace fuel filters and stuff in the fuel system, that you should always have more than a quarter of a tank of fuel. And part of the reasons for that is simply that, gravity works, So that's everything picked up. Years ago we had crossover tubes from tank to tank that was underneath, but we figured out that wasn't a good idea because road debris knocks those off and you end up with these huge fuel spills. So now everything pulls from the top of the tank, and it's got a tube that goes down to the bottom of the tank, to pull up and to return fuel, to keep it from, because you don't want to just return fuel into the top and it splash and create all kinds of air pockets and stuff that gets pulled back up into the fuel that causes the engine to run rough. So you pull and push into that tank from the bottom. So when you're doing that, you think about that, the deeper the fuel level is, the more pressure there is, to pull it up. But not only that, but once you cut it off, if that fuel system in that engine or on that truck does not have any type of check valve to hold fuel in that engine, if there's not if the pressure is not enough to hold, that basically that vacuum in that fuel, because there shouldn't be any air in that fuel system, up in the engine, with a lower tank level, it can actually, gravity because the engine's going to be higher, can actually push and overcome the depth pressure of where that pickup tube is in the bottom of that tank. And all of a sudden you end up with a starting issue, with a hard start type of issue, or extended crank, the kind of terms that we use, that you could get simply because it's got to pick that fuel up, and it can all come from lower fuel levels. So it's kind of strange nowadays, some of the little nuances that are out there on some of these newer engines and trucks. So
I mean, and basically because when you start an engine, you're actually engaged in the biggest pull of them all. I mean, I hate to kind of simplify it to that point, but starting an engine is you talk about the idea of that pull that's going on there. I just want to remind people of them. And I know sometimes we talk simplistically on this segment, but it's like that's one of the points of this segment, is that a lot of this stuff is incredibly simple. The complexity of maintenance is not in each individual component. It is in the overall picture. It's one of those things where each individual note of music is not that hard. It's when you actually have to have a whole bunch of them in rapid succession to create the music of the road. That's where people don't realize the complexity is not so much in each individual component, but in its kind of working as an orchestra together to get you to your next checkpoint. Let's talk about those filters really quickly before we run out of time here. You got about a minute to talk about when it's time to change those fuel filters?
Well, and that varies. That's going to vary on the conditions you're running in, how long it's been since the last filter change. Are you using the filters that would be recommended by the OEM, or at least a suitable aftermarket filter for that particular engine? Because even though it takes time, it takes years to really truly understand what works best with this particular truck, with this particular engine, things like that. But there are things that work like that out there. So, but generally speaking, nowadays with the way emissions levels and all these different things are, fuel filter, hey, I need my fuel filter changed. I've got low power. Most low power complaints nowadays are due to D-rates, not because of fuel system issues, it seems. I mean, it still occurs, but because we do have a tendency nowadays, it seems, to overlook those simple things that used to be some of the first things we look for. Like, if the truck comes in with any type of engine complaint, anything going on, the first, well, let's put a new fuel filter on. Well, we do that. It's cheap insurance to make sure that part is really working good. But if you've had any type of contaminants and things like that, you want to make sure of that.
It's one of those things that often you have people at OEMs and often people who actually make products will say it's so good that you just forget about it. And part of your job is to basically don't forget about it. Don't forget about it. Even if it's running fantastic. That's one of the other big problems that has happened in this modern age. We always talk about how, the quality of things have gone down. Actually, one of the other problems is that because so much quality has gone down, the places where quality is really high, it's almost like having, 5 kids and 4 of them are terrorists and one of them is wonderful, and the wonderful one actually gets not people paying attention to him, that he actually gets, sloughed off, and then suddenly you realize he's got problems because nobody was paying him attention because he was always fine. Well, you were always fine. How many parents have told kids who wanted more attention, you were always fine? And it's like, well, now I'm not. We go all over the place here. Kevin Lindsey joins us on a regular basis every single Tuesday for Maintenance Matters. He is the manager of technical service for TravelCenters of America, who are the sponsors of this segment. Kevin, thank you so much, my friend. We will eventually get through all the winter planning once spring arrives. I promise you we'll get through all this stuff.
Oh, yeah, right. Yes, we will.